There we go. Hello. Perfect. All right, awesome. We've got at least one person. Thank you, B-Dog Platinum, for the follow. And let's go ahead and get started on things then. All right, awesome. So, hello. My name is Leonard. Thank you, Mr. City H, for following. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to deal with all the follow notifications on this, but that'll be all right. Yeah, anyway, so my name is DaWoblefet. I got top 8 at a regional recently, the Indianapolis Regional. It featured quite a few different players. So you can see I had 260 listed. I don't actually know if that number's right. Like on Arcanine, they had us down at like 257. Oh, well, hello there then. Not fake memes. These is the way. All sorts of follows coming in today. I see some mishes in the chat too, which is good. If you subscribe, you get a Dwobble mish emote, and that's all I've got. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm limited to just one. Thank you for all the follows so far. Anyway, this has 260 players. It was a very large regional, comparably. We had definitely enough to get 9 rounds and enough to get the increased pricing. Thank you for the subscription there now. No, it's not a team report with Audie. This is just my own thing. Audie didn't reach out specifically, and I think he was wise not to, since this team was originally based on another team that I'll go into. So Audie did do a team report recently with Jeremy Rodriguez, which I would strongly recommend you check out. Serapis, he also used the Calyrex-Ice Reshiram combination, but he got 2nd place, so his finish, of course, being more impressive, just the nature of, you know, he got 2nd, I got 8th. Well, I guess officially 7th, but yeah. Anyway, so this team was great and fun, and so I'm going to be going over it today, and the different matchups, how it works, stuff like that. Yeah. The fellow's name was Gilgamesh. I do not know how to pronounce Alex's last name. I'm so sorry. But I know their online name is Gilgamesh. I did not take it directly from Gilgamesh because I did not have the pace directly. I did have several stream games to review from EUIC, which was helpful. But otherwise, I was kind of going into it with just my own take on things. Just trying it out myself. Initially, what I was doing in preparation for the regional, I really thought I was going to be using Groudon Venusaur stuff. I thought Venusaur was really strong. There are so many teams that I fought on ladder with Showdown that I would just like lead Groudon Venu into, and I would just sleep powder, and I would just win because they didn't have any sleep checks. Alex Della Pascua. Sure. Okay. I'm close anyway. A brilliant team builder, at least. I believe Alex used that team in a regional prior to the event as well. So, very smart team builder with this because it's a super, super fun team. Della Pasca, Goggles and Didi. Some people do use Goggles and Didi, but they don't. I mean, you don't see Goggles all that often. A lot of Pokemon, like Goggles, is typically restricted to Incineroar, and then sometimes you'll see it on Indeedee, and if your name is Stefan Mott, you'll see it on Zapdos, but not too many other people run Goggles on there. And so there wasn't a whole lot of sleep powder checks, I felt, at least in my judgment. And so I kept trying to play with that, but I couldn't find the other restricted to work with it. I was using like Groudon Yveltal, I was using Groudon Zacian, I was using Groudon Lunala, all of those, and just none of them were working. I didn't like any of them for independent reasons. And also, I felt like I was relying too hard on Sleep Powder in a number of different matchups. So what I would do is I would like my turn ones would be like, I would just depend on Sleep Powder. And that's a really, really bad way to play consistently because then your teams are only going to be 75%. Like your turn 1 plays, if your normal play into matchups is going to be Sleep Powder, then that's not going to be very consistent. And so, you know, you can just complain and say, oh, well, I just missed Sleep Powder, you know? It's not my fault, it's the game's fault. But it is your fault because you're not team building correctly or you're not playing your Venusaur correctly that you're relying on it so much with that Sleep Powder. So I think the smart Venusaur players are able to get around that, but perhaps I'm just not one of those smart Venusaur players. So initially what I had thought to try as a backup strategy was O's team that he used at EUIC. And let me go ahead and pull that up. So that was this team with Life Orb, Kyogre, Assault Vest, Rillaboom, and Torn. I really, really liked these. I wasn't a huge fan of the Torn set at first, and then I realized how good like a boosting item on Torrent actually is. It's super good. I actually really, really like either Sharp Beak or Life Orb on the Hurricane, on the Hurricane mod, but I like Life Orb way more on Kyogre. I love Life Orb Kyogre. It is so powerful. You can just like blow stuff up. And then you have like normally like Water Spout with Life Orb, especially just running only a water type attack, might seem counterintuitive. But I didn't mind it. The logic would be like you either Water Spout early or you Dynamax your Kyogre, and so you get the strong water type attacks anyway. So it was fine for me. And then if you end up at like low HP outside of Dynamax, theoretically you've already dealt them a lot of damage. So Ice Beam and Thunder can do a lot after the fact. So it's okay. But I tried this team and it just didn't, something about it didn't click. I didn't care much for the Landorus slot as personally. I didn't really quite get what it was for. I talked with O a little bit about it. I didn't have the pace of O's team either. And O said that they were actually looking into replacing Torn, and I'm like, well, I like Torn, but that's not the one I want to get rid of. I want to get rid of Lando. And also, on ladder, I consistently lost to Renia Sun, which was very frustrating. At least with the Venusaur stuff, like, another advantage of Venusaur stuff was that, I thought it destroyed Renia, because you have to lead, very specifically Grimmsnarl Charizard into it. It's so hard to, it requires you to have Trick Iron Ball. It's just a nightmare, I think, for the Renia player. But anyway, so I couldn't get Venusaur stuff to work, and I couldn't get this team to work. And so I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go to my backup strategy and just try this out. I'm just going to load it up in the team builder. Calyrex-Ice, Reshiram. I saw this on stream versus Marcus. I think that was the first time I had watched it. And it just looks so good. Eject button Incineroar pivoting into Calyrex-Ice to immediately get it on the board sounded so powerful. I just love that idea in theory. I didn't know what Reshiram was for. I didn't know what Gastrodon was for, but I figured, you know what, the heck, I'll just throw some Pokemon on here. And see how they work, see if somebody who is more skilled at me at team building knows what they're doing, and see if I can just pick up on it. Usually, I have some trouble doing that sometimes. I think that's partially why I wasn't being so successful with O's team, because I didn't really understand what the Pokemon were for, and so I was worried about that with this. But actually, it was interesting. Playing the O team helped me realize why some of these Pokemon were on there. So typically, a very common way that most Zacian Kyogre players deal with Calyrex stuff is they'll max their Kyogre, and then they'll have Incin Zacian as pivots. So it makes it very annoying because even though you can Quake all three of those, you really don't want to do that if you can help it. You'd prefer to click Glacial Lance as many times as you could, and usually those teams are going to have a grass type, so you need to be able to click Glacial Lance in different positions, and sometimes you could do that, sometimes you couldn't. But with Gastrodon, you eliminate the max Kyogre spot, and Gastrodon can also survive one Grassy Glide in Dynamax unless it's holding the Miracle Seed. Miracle Seed Rillaboom was actually really annoying for this team for a number of different reasons. But yeah, Gastrodon was really, really strong versus that, so that made sense to me. Reshiram initially, I was like, what's that for? And then watching it play out, just in practice versus both Sun and versus Zacian builds, as well as versus, Calyrex Shadow Zacian builds, I saw how good it was, because it's really hard for the opponent to damage it very quickly. It just has a nice typing. You don't need that extra slot, I think, to be another Trick Room setter. I've never liked the Palkia Caly-Ice combinations. Palkia is nice in theory because it lets you set up Trick Room versus Kyogre a lot better, but it's being weak to Play Rough is really problematic in my opinion. Whereas with Reshiram, although you still take quite a bit of damage from Play Rough because obviously it's a Zacian, and so it's just going to do more damage anyway. It's surprisingly bulky with this Assault Vest. Dragon Fire leaves it only weak to Ground, which of course is primarily Groudon, and Caly-Ice loves fighting Groudon because Groudon doesn't do very much damage to it. And you deal a lot of damage back. So it's very risky to try to do Groudon stuff. And if they bring Groudon, then they're boosting the power of your blue flares, which is also very nice. So all in all, the team really came well together. And I'll go ahead and I'll just pull it up now. So you can see this is the team. You'll have the paste, obviously, later. You can you can copy it down if you want to now, but the paste will be accessible here shortly. But anyway, so I'll go ahead and I'll talk a little bit about some of the different restricteds. I also want to compare it a little bit to, like I said, Audi, that is CK49, recently did a team report with Jeremy. That is Serapis. And so you can see this team here. Jeremy had used this team in MPA at one point. I'm on the same team as him. I was very intrigued by it in both, like, I did I think like 2 or 3 practice sets against it. Maybe it was just 2. But I remember it feeling really tough. So like it felt really annoying to fight it unless I had like very specific answers. Like he didn't like taunt, goggles, Incin. He had Amoonguss on the team at the time. He didn't like fighting that. He didn't like a couple other Pokemon too that were really annoying for him. But I watched him play his set versus King of Mars, and I'm like, oh, this team's really good. I feel like it has a lot of different options. So I was already initially kind of on board with the Calyrex-Ice Reshiram stuff. And then just trying out Gilgamesh's team was incredible. So I really liked a whole different bunch of avenues on this. And I thought a lot of these things were really, really good. And so I'm just like, yeah, I'm just going to do it, and we'll see how it goes. And it went pretty well. So I'll go ahead and I'll talk about each of the sets here in turn. I've got the stuff pulled up on Showdown as well, so I'll just go through it like this, so it's a little bit, so you can kind of see the sets and just focus on them one at a time. So I also go over the restricteds first. Probably the easiest spread to talk about is Calyrex-Ice, which is just max HP, max attack with Force Def. I don't honestly know what else you would... I remember I asked in Showdown chat, I don't know, like, hey, is there any other goals you guys can think of for Calyrex-Ice? And they're like, no, there's nothing else. Just run max attack. I'm like, okay. In theory, you can run like less attack because it's already your highest stat, and put a little bit more into bulk, which might make it easier, for example, to set a second Trick Room later on. But I didn't know what those situations were, like where I actually want the extra bulk other than generic bulk. And generic attack was important for things like Calyrex-Ice Gastrodon combination attacks in Trick Room. And in general, Calyrex-Ice is like you really don't want to miss KOs with Calyrex-Ice. Like you really, really, like you want to get KOs because getting KOs translates to attack boosts. And that's just huge for Calyrex-Ice. So very straightforward spread. Jeremy didn't go min speed on his Calyrex because he had Porygon 2 in order to be able to side proc with Foul Play. So that was important for him. But all my Pokemon that could side proc Weakness Policy, except for Incineroar, would have been slower anyway. Or excuse me, they're already slow enough, so, or they have priority, so it doesn't matter. So, Calyrex-Ice was pretty simple, straightforward as a result. The only other thing you can do with it is like you can cut back attack and increase defense to make Foul Play, like so you can live Foul Plays and stuff. But it doesn't matter as much in my opinion because the Foul Play you're most scared of anyway is going to be like a Veltal Life Orb Foul Play. That's the thing that really scares this, because I'm pretty sure that just one-shots Calyrex, even without any boosts. And there's not a whole... If you, like, EV to live it, then you cut back on so much attack, it's just not worth it. So, yeah, that's Calyrex. Reshiram is the other restricted. Again, very simple spread, 252, 252, 4. Jeremy talked about this in the video with CK49. You're like, oh, well, don't you have any other goals that you want? It's just like, no. I just want max special attack. I just want to do the most damage I can with my restricted. I think, who was it? I think Crystal Ninetales asked me, like, hey, do you cut back for, like Precipice Blades being a 3-8 KO or something? I'm like, that's never, ever come up. Like, I just don't care. So I originally thought that I needed to change this up a little bit to make this, like, a little bit better, but I'm like, yeah, I don't think I need to change this. The 5 speed IVs was again lifted straight from Jeremy. So this hits a 97 speed stat, so it can be expected to outspeed the majority of Incineroars. In practice, I don't think I ever had an Incineroar that was faster than me. And in like some objective data, let me see if I can pull that up actually. I'm going to have to pull that up real quick off the cuff, but let me see if I've got it. I can pull it up. I asked Georgian to run some objective data for me on straight on usage stats. Let me see if that works. I think I might have to escape full screen for a second. Yeah. Okay. Go back into full screen now. So here's usage data on Incineroar in April. And so this has data on like the relative stats, like at each ELO range, how much offense somebody's running. So this was something I reached out to Georgian for. He used to run these in the past and stopped, I think, just because it took him some time to do. And so I saw at this ELO, you can see that Incineroars, there's like a high influx of Incineroars running 95 speed. This is a little bit higher, comparable to the lower ELO, so it's probably a high concentration of players, like all spamming at a high ladder. But that meant to me that I'm pretty sure 97 is going to be faster than the majority of Incineroar. And it's going to underspeed the majority of Rillaboom, because typically Rillaboom, if they don't run, like typically they either run, like they have some speed EVs, or they run like just a little bit underneath 31. So that way they can, so they aren't, what am I thinking of? So they can underspeed Indeedee potentially. Rillaboom and Indeedee have the same speed stat, so getting Grassy Terrain up is typically pretty good. It matters more than like outspeeding them for a U-turn or something in most cases, because you can like fake out the Indeedee and then hit him with a partner, whereas before you wouldn't be able to fake out. So that's pretty cool. I know Pengy actually ran minimum speed Rillaboom, which I think is also really cool. So my Reshiram doesn't underspeed those, but that means I outspeed that particular Rillaboom, which is nice. So anyway, that was the data I was sourcing for that decision, and so I was pretty content with it. Nope, I'm not trying to do that. Thank you. Okay, so if I go back over here, DaWoblefet, thank you. So the moves, Blue Flare, Draco, and Earth Power, I think are pretty standard. There's not really a whole lot reason to deviate from these. Blue Flares are going to be your strongest max flare. You have other options like Fusion Flare and Heat Wave, but you definitely want Blue Flare. Also, 130 base power with 85% accuracy with a 20% chance to burn is a really good move. I mean, that's as strong as what Blades is, right? I mean, you only hit one target, right? But you have a chance to burn. It's way better than, for example, like, say, Palkia, if you think about the comparison with Palkia. Because Palkia's stab move is 110 power, has less accuracy at 80%, and has no secondary effect. So, Blue Flare is really strong. Love Blue Flare. Blue Flare is a great move. I think I missed maybe one or two, but it's definitely really important. Oh, that's right. Yeah, Precipice Blaze is only 120 base power. But anyway, Draco Meteor is also like pretty mandatory. It's a stronger max move, and it's the strongest special attack that you've got. I would never want to run Dragon Pulse. You typically will max Dragon with this. You don't Draco very often unless you're in like a super endgame situation. And then Earth Power kind of rounds out your coverage. It's important to be able to hit Incineroar. Obviously, that's going to be an important thing. You can use Earth Power. If they have, if Calyrex-Ice is on the board, then Unnerve will prevent Shuka Berries from activating. It'll also, I mean, it does a decent chunk to Incin anyway. It'll also, like, you'll hit Regieleki, and it's a good max move for Max Quake, of course. Because, like, if you get Max Quake boosts on an Assault Vest Reshiram, like, if you don't take a lot of damage getting it set up, then it can be very hard for special attacks to actually break through it. Like, for example, Regieleki is never breaking through Reshiram. And that's just nice to have, you know? Unlike Palkia, where Palkia can be blown up by Regieleki, Reshiram's never dying to that, so that's kind of nice. Probably the most interesting thing about the Reshiram is going to be Shadow Ball. And so there's a few different options that Reshiram can run. Jeremy ended up running Solar Beam. So Solar Beam hits other Gastrodon, and you can use it to damage Kyogre a bit harder. But wasn't really a big fan of Solar Beam. I'm just like, eh. I mean, I didn't really need to hit Gastrodon. Like, in my judgment, it was okay. Like, I didn't, it wasn't a bad move. Like, really the most relevant thing it was useful for is, like, I could max Grass and then Spore stuff with Amoonguss. But the move that Gilgamesh ran was Heat Wave, which I think makes a lot of sense. It's a spread move. And so that's just nice. Like, if you set up Max Flare and then you're out of Dynamax, Heat Wave is, like, very low prediction. you can just click the spread move in Trick Room, and then, you know, you don't have to think very hard about what they're going to do. But it's also weaker than Blue Flare and Max, so you're never going to click it then. So it's like specific situations out of Max. And Reshiram doesn't always Max, but I typically, if I brought Calyrex-Ice and Reshiram, I would max Reshiram a decent amount, unless Calyrex-Ice was just in, like, a great spot. That was another thing that was really nice about this team. It had really flexible Dynamax options with these two. But the move I ended up doing in the end was Shadow Ball. This was for a couple reasons. The most important reason was for Lunala, because this team is pretty weak to Lunala in my judgment. It can knock out Incineroar in one hit. It cannot knock out Mimikyu in one hit, but it could if it gets the Meteor Beam boost. It's not super easy for it to do that, but you should live Moongeist Beams from most Lunala. You won't survive everyone. So if you, like, look at this, you can see. Just pull this up. With, like, you know, insane special defense, right? So you can see this Lunala doesn't kill. And so this, with max special attack, you only knock it out 1/16 of the time. And typically Lunala don't run max special attack. They usually run, like, just enough so that way their Meteor Beam knocks out opposing Incineroar, which just makes sense to me. But anyway, that's the primary reason I ran Shadow Ball, was just to hit Lunala a little bit harder. But it also came up occasionally versus Calyrex Shadow stuff. For example, if my Reshiram got to -1 special attack, which is not uncommon, like, for example, say I'm in Trick Room, they have an Incineroar, they have Calyrex Shadow, Zacian. It's pretty common for my Reshiram to get Parting Shotted. And so since Calyrex Shadow has decent special bulk, Shadow Ball just means, like, if I, like, break its sash with anything, that means Shadow Ball will pick up a knockout afterwards. And that's nice because that means that you're pressuring both the Calyrex and the Zacian. So both the restricteds are being pressured by my own, which is good. And I'm not committed to just trying to Cali-Ice them, because Cali-Ice is a lot more risky to try to generate offense in Trick Room versus those. Because if you get it wrong, like if you get a turn wrong versus Calyrex Shadow with Reshiram, then you're going to take some damage from Astral Barrage, but it's really not that bad. Compare it, like, for example, Calyrex Shadow versus Reshiram. I also like how the calc has AV as a default. I don't know if, like, anyone else was using that at the point or not, but you can see, like, Astral does, like, almost nothing to you. Like, it does 25, and that's not max, right? Like, and if you max, then it's just gonna deal, like, nothing. And if you get, like, Quake Boost, it's gonna deal, like, nothing. So it's really nice for that, I think, in my judgment. Also, I mean, theoretically, you can also use it as, like, max Ghost to drop their defense for Caly-Ice. But I don't think it ever came up in practice or in the actual tournament. But I like that. Heat Wave would have been nice in a few situations as well. Shadow Ball ended up winning me my top 16 set, so I'm not complaining. Anyway, so those are the two restricted Pokemon. The non-restricteds, probably going in order of most importance. Mimikyu is going to be your chief Trick Room setter. It is very, very hard to stop Mimikyu from setting Trick Room. You would just have so many, like, anti-Trick Room options just in this one Pokemon in and of itself. It's got Safety Goggles, which makes it immune to Amoonguss, and it makes it immune to Venusaur Sleep Powder. It's a Ghost type, so it can't be faked out. It has Taunt that is faster than other Incineroar's taunts, at least the majority of them. You can see, like, the relationship between Reshiram's speed decision and Mimikyu's speed decision. It has 96 speed, so it's quite speedy, and it should outspeed the majority of Incineroar that I fight. And it also has a number of other traits that I think make it a little bit better than P2 versus some matchups. So Will-O-Wisp is very, very nice into Zacian, because Zacian often will try to stick around on the board versus you. Like, if they fight you in early game, they usually like to sub, but sometimes they're not. And if you ever get a burn on Zacian, then it's, like, almost instantly over, because if you burn a Zacian and you've got Reshiram, then they just can't do any damage to you. Or even if you burn a Zacian, that means Calyrex-Ice is way safer versus it, because Behemoth Blade only barely knocks out Caly-Ice. Like, it's pretty close, actually. So, like, if you intimidate the Zacian or you burn it, then Calyrex-Ice can, like, potentially, you could switch in on a Behemoth Blade. You'll take a lot of damage still. I mean, it's not trivial. But it means you can survive the hit later, which is extremely important. Burn is a really powerful status in this metagame. I had been searching for a while for, like, a good Pokemon that could use Will-O-Wisp. Cali Shadow is probably the best generic. And Rotom Heat's, like, okay. But Mimikyu has been really good. I mean, you can Will-O-Wisp very important Pokemon like Groudon. You can Will-O-Wisp opposing Calyrex-Ice. There's a lot of good Pokemon that do not like Will-O-Wisp. You can Will-O-Wisp Landorus, and most people's like anti-sleep of choice is typically going to be Goggles and not Lumberry. So usually Will-O-Wisp, even if they have Goggles to stop Amoonguss, they can't stop Mimikyu. So that's pretty important. Mimikyu, otherwise, yeah, Shadow Sneak is important for being able to proc Calyrex's weakness policy. I didn't have enough time to test whether or not I actually wanted to do Min Attack or not. But I ended up with this. Shadow Sneak does not do that much damage to Calyrex anyway. That'd be the only reason why you'd want to reduce Shadow Sneak's damage. And it's also kind of, sometimes you can have it be important versus opponents. Like, there were so many times where I would sneak stuff and it would just not do enough damage. Because, I mean, it's not that strong. Like, it's only a, 40 base power attack, so it's not incredibly powerful. And then Taunt, like I said, is important for taunting opposing Incineroar, or taunting Amoonguss, or taunting opposing Trick Room Pokemon. Like, if they're trying to reverse your own Trick Room, you can taunt them to stop that. So Taunt is a very nice, like, anti-BS move. It just says, like, no, you can stop that. Cloud CGG asks, how'd you end up leading if you saw a Rillaboom on the opposing team? Since that could be a threat to Mimikyu. That is an important point. So Mimikyu, although it is a very good Trick Room setter, it has a number of weaknesses. One of them is going to be Rillaboom, because Rillaboom can knock out Mimikyu pretty reliably. And especially since I'm, like, max HP, max Spadef. You can actually change the EVs on this if you want. You can, like, with Incineroar, intimidate the Rillaboom and make it so that a G-Max Drum Solo won't knock out the Mimikyu. But I don't think it's very consistent to do that for a couple reasons. One, the opponent can just Grassy Glide and break your disguise and then follow up with the other Pokemon's attack. And two, even though G-Max Drum Solo might not KO, it'll put it low enough that any other attack will, like, hit Mimikyu, pop its disguise, and then it'll faint anyway. So Rillaboom is pretty complicated. If they are, depending on their speed stats, I could Will-Wisp it, but that's usually not going to be too reliable because most Rillaboom aren't that slow, where my Mimikyu will outspeed them. So typically what I would like to do, if they max Rillaboom, their max is intended specifically and only to knock out Mimikyu. It can't do anything else, usually. Like it does some damage to Calyrex, but not a whole lot else. So usually if they lead Rillaboom, then for example, I can switch into my Incineroar, take the eject button, and then button back out to another Pokemon. Like, for example, I can switch Mimikyu to Incin, button back to Mimikyu, and then switch in Incin on the other slot. I could lead Calyrex if I really wanted to. More realistically, probably what I'm going to be doing is leading Reshiram, and I can scare it away that way. The Rillaboom's set depends a lot on that. But usually, like, if they have to commit to maxing their Rillaboom, then usually it's you can deal with it. Like, if you might be able to trade, for example, like, say you lead Mimikyu Amoonguss, and so they're for sure going to be able to knock you out. If you do something like Trick Room Spore, and you get the other slot to sleep, then you can send in Calyrex, Trick Room, and then you are in, like, you're going to still take a lot of damage with your Calyrex, but you might be able to pull it back with Calyrex Reshiram in Trick Room. It just kind of depends on their other Pokemon. It is probably, I think Rillaboom is one of the more annoying Pokemon, especially Miracle Seed Rillaboom, because it's just that much stronger versus Mimikyu. But yeah, so you might, like I said, part of the reason why I didn't have extra defense on there was for that theory, but also because, as I showed you versus Lunala, you need a lot of special defense versus Lunala. But there's also another important calc that comes up where, so if you look at Mimikyu, definitely not this. You cannot afford to run something like this. Why is that? Oh, I'll never lock that off. Okay. So if you look at this, So Astral Barrage will never knock out Mimikyu, but that's not what you need to look at, because what a very annoying combination versus this team could be would be if they led with something that can break my Disguise and then follow with a Astral Barrage. So if it's Life Orb, I can't do anything about it, right? But with this, you actually survive the attack the majority of the time, but it is kind of finicky. So if I just, so Mimikyu will take 1/8 of its health here, if I can remember how much that is. 162 divided by 8, that should be 20, I think. It should be 20. Yeah, it's 20. So if I subtract 20 here, and I have 142 HP, you can see that I survive the attack the majority of the time, but it's not like super reliable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I survived that attack 10/16 of the time, which is not super reliable, of course. 10/16 is not going to be super consistent, but it's better than 0/16. And I don't have, obviously, an alternate Trick Room setter like P2 in order to set versus that. So Mimikyu is a lot weaker versus Ghosts. I'd be curious what Gilgamesh ran on their Mimikyu. If it had more Fizz Def or if it was more Speed Def like this, and then they just have a different game plan. Because there is other game plans. You don't necessarily have to set Trick Room versus Cali Shadow. Like, for example, say you lead, like, Mimikyu and Amoonguss into, like, say, Regieleki and Cali Shadow. So you could survive the Electro Web Astral Barrage combination attack, which means that you have a free Spore there. So they may max the Eleki. If they max the Eleki, then you can Rage Powder with Amoonguss, take the attack, and then set Trick Room anyway. Another thing you can do is you can just Shadow Sneak straight away, and then Shadow Sneak in Foul Play, and do that double knockout, do that double target into the Calyrex and knock it out straight away. So there's definitely options that you've got versus Calyrex Shadow, but I liked having the extra Spadef on Mimikyu just for those edge cases where you would survive the attack. Also, if you survive the attack once, usually most players, they will stop depending on that as a reliable like strat in order to knock out the Mimikyu. So that's another advantage it has. You might just be able to do that. Also with extra Spadef, you survive a lot of different other attacks too. Like having max Spadef, I mean you have as much Spadef as you possibly can. Mimikyu's highest stat is its special defense, so you're boosting that is really nice for never other Pokemon. So if you look at, for example, versus Kyogre, and you look at Mystic Water Water Spout will not knock out Mimikyu. Well, I mean, that's assuming, right? I mean, it would knock it out after Disguise. But if they did not have this, for example, then it would never knock you out. Even with Modest, it's not going to lock you out. Very reliably, at least. You will be surviving the attack the vast majority of the time. So, trying to think of another Pokemon that Mimikyu is important to survive. You can't survive like Behemoth Blade, like ever. doesn't matter how many Intimidates or Burns you put on it. If you ever survive that, then you're like doing really well. But that's Mimikyu. The other most important Pokemon for setting up Trick Room is going to be Incineroar. So, if I had more time with this team, like I said, this was my backup team going into the tournament, then I probably would have spent additional time trying to figure out if I wanted more attack on the Incineroar. I would not be surprised if Gilgamesh's Incineroar had more attack. This was the spread I ended up going with. So with 92 speed EVs, you hit a 92 speed stat, which is a very pretty number, of course, and that's the only reason why I did that. No, of course not. So you'll recall that when we looked at the Incineroar spreads, we saw that the speed stats culminated around 95, but then the most that you'd see still below then, like for example, if you see up to 91, you see that's 84%. What that means is that up to 84% of Incineroars will run at least 91 speed, and then from there it's gonna vary until you get all the way to max speed. So I was pretty confident that my Incineroar would be faster than opposing Incineroar. In testing, that also has what happened to be the case. And this is nice to have this much speed on Incineroar for opposing Incineroar, because having the faster Fake Out or the faster Taunt is nice. So for example, I can faster Fake Out the opposing Incineroar, and then if the opponent procs Eject Button, then Mimikyu can set Trick Room. Incineroar will button out into Calyrex, and then you can just like Side Sneak, and then Glacial Lance through their entire team, and it's over. Like, it's super over if they ever do that. People didn't typically give that to me because since this team was known from EUIC, and I also think it was somewhat popular at EUIC, I think it was kind of cool. So people would probably have seen it and realized, oh, that's a eject button, so they don't typically do that as much anymore. But that also limits your opponent's plays. If they don't attack you, then you can just switch out with Parting Shot. And that's typically going to be better for you because then you get the attack and special attack drop. It may not be exactly the order that you want it to be in, but eject button I think was really good. I think it would have been better if it was like how Gilgamesh had, where you had the surprise factor to add to it. But even without it, I thought eject button was incredibly strong, especially in a best of 3 environment. As for the other EVs, this is a pretty lazy spread. It's one of those lazy spreads that will survive a +1 Sacred Sword, like an unintimidated Sacred Sword from Zacian. And that's like an example of something that really isn't going to come up very often for me, because if I have Incineroar, I'm typically going to be leading it. It's unlikely that I'm going to have Incineroar at full in the back. Like, that usually doesn't come up very often, and like they have to be out with Zacian, not intimidated. That's very rare. So the defense goal is kind of meh, and then also the Spadef, like the Spadef is just a dump after that. I think it would survive something like, for example, a Life Orb, Zapdos's Max Hurricane pretty reliably. Not actually 100% sure on that, but let's check here. So if I had 252, 68, versus Zapdos, Life Orb, Max. Yeah, you'll easily live that. Even if they're modest, you'll live that. So that's an example of something you can live. But perhaps I wanted, like, I don't know how much the defensive investment matters. It is, you don't, like, want nothing, that's for sure. You definitely don't want, like, max speed or something like that. You don't need that. This is plenty of speed. You're fast enough versus the majority of Incineroar. And if they're faster than that, you know, I've got my own Mimikyu, which can taunt them. And if they're faster than that thing, then, well, they're probably max speed at that point, and I'm not going to outspeed that. That's too much. So, yeah, potentially running more attack is useful, because if you have more attack on Incineroar, then you, again, it's like you encourage them, or you, like, if they don't attack your eject button, then you're much more of an offensive presence in Trick Room. Like, if you're able to pressure a lot more damage on Zacian with Flare Blitz, that can be an example of that. But I was overall happy with this. And obviously, like, Fake Out plus Mimikyu, like, you can name, there are definitely combinations that can get around that. And that's can chiefly be with Dynamaxing, but not everything can get around that. So I like Incin Mimikyu a lot as a lead. It would be one of my go-to leads with Calyrex-Ice and Reshiram in the back. That would be a pretty typical lead if like your pretty typical game plan versus a lot of stuff. There are some things though that you can't, like you cannot fake out. Like for example, you can't fake out a Lunala. And so if they lead, for example, Lunala plus X, and the X can like do some decent damage to Mimikyu. Like for example, say they lead with Lunala and X maxes, then they could just theoretically double the Mimikyu, knock you out turn 1, and your Incineroar just faked out into a Maxmon, and it's not looking very threatening. So Amoonguss helps with those other board positions. So Jeremy on his team, that is not Jeremy's team, this is Jeremy's team, has no redirection. Jeremy's redirection is more so like Regieleki pressuring the knockout on the Pokemon that would be annoying for the stuff that you care about for double targets. I'm indifferent on that, whether or not those things are better. I didn't like committing to Regieleki Dynamax, because I would, like, you always want to Dynamax your Trick Room Sweepers if you can. And bringing Regieleki just made me feel like, I don't know. Especially, like, Aleki Mimikyu isn't very good, I don't think. I think Aleki and P2 are a lot better. But it's just, it's kind of awkward with Mimikyu. Because, like, if you max Electric, then what's your Mimikyu gonna do? Like, Will-Wisp? Taunt? You want a Trick Room. And if you ever Trick Room while you have your like, super fast Regieleki out on the board, that's just kind of awkward. So, I didn't care much for that. So, Amoonguss is nice. I like what it could do with respect to that as well. With Focus Sash, it also means you're guaranteed to take at least 1 hit. So again, important logic for this team is being able to, like, take 2 hits, so that way, like, Mimikyu doesn't take the 2nd hit. I don't really care otherwise much else. So Yeah, but these EVs on Mimikyu are kind of, or excuse me, not on Mimikyu, but on my Amoonguss are pretty interesting. I don't know of any other one. I'm a nerd when it comes to this kind of stuff, so this spread is like super specific. It's EV to survive what I assumed was O's Kyogre, which again, his pace isn't public, right? But O had like his HP stat was revealed on stream. And Kyogre has to be a certain speed stat as well. You have to be at least 139 speed stat on Kyogre. You cannot be slower than that. You cannot be slower than 139 because you need Tailwind Kyogre to outspeed opposing Regieleki. Like, that's just a non-negotiable. You have to be faster. Unless you're, like, super bulky. That'd be the only way you couldn't afford that. But O's was Life Orb. So, what I did was I EV'd the Amoonguss to survive, like, with whatever special attack investment was. I think it was, like, 140 plus or something like that on the Kyogre. I EV'd to survive that, or that, plus another Life Orb Water Spout, you know, after the recoil chip, 15/16 of the time. With the rest in defense. And so, the logic for this is really stupid, because that never came up where I needed to survive 2 Life Orb Water Spouts like that. I actually don't know what board state I would have to have for that to actually come up. The real reason behind it was because I wanted to run more defense on Amoonguss than just survive Behemoth Blade. And I didn't want to do up to Adamant Behemoth Blade. I just wanted some sort of balanced EV spread, and so that's like my justification for it. So I've got like, I don't know if I can pull it up or not. Let me see if I can. If I just do like this, no, it's not gonna work. I guess I could do like Snipboard. Let me just do that, and you can see like, this is like, well, come on, I have that copy, don't I? Copy. Paste. Why isn't it pasting, dude? What if I do like this? There we go. Okay. You can see this. Yeah, so it has like this HP stat, and these are the specific Water Spout rolls. I used the survival calc tool in order to pull this off. I obviously didn't do this by hand. But anyway, the TLDR of this spread is basically it's supposed to make me feel better about myself. Yeah, it is very specific, and it didn't actually, like I said, it didn't, like, I didn't care actually about that goal so much. It was just basically like I wanted justification for running more SPDEF than more defense than what I was running before, which was just a lazy spread. Anyway, and then it's, you know, just optimized with respect to that. The speed, I wasn't too particular on either. I didn't actually know what speeds I have to run, so I just ended up going with this to just reduce opposing, like, foul play damage. Because foul play is a move that opponents will click versus me. Like, I'll Rage Powder away a foul play from a Calyrex-Ice or something like that. It could come up, right? Theoretically, maybe I wouldn't want to do that because, like, I could run, for example, like, Careful 31 like that. And the reason I'd want to do that is to, in case I ever maxed my Amoonguss for some unforsaken reason, or for some forsaken reason, to, like, get the SPDEF drop for Reshiram, then the foul play does, like, a little bit more damage, but yeah, no, that never comes up. So I just run this. Anyway, so the reason I used foul play, the other options that I was considering were Hex and Pollen Puff. So Hex is very similar logic to foul play. It's a side proc for Calyrex-Ice, because it does come up where you want Amoonguss and you have Calyrex-Ice and Amoonguss on the board, and you don't want to spore something, or you can't spore something. So Amoonguss has nothing better to do. And it importantly hits Calyrex Shadow. This Pokemon, like, I tested Pollen Puff, and it was way worse. You don't need to heal your Pokemon. You need to, like having an offensive pressure, for example, versus Calyrex Shadow is way more important. Like, being able to, like, double target it with foul play and, like, say, a -1 Glacial Lance in Trick Room is significantly more important. And even though I have Foul Play and Intimidate, as any player knows who runs both Yveltal and Incineroar on the same team, you just don't Foul Play things you've Intimidated a lot. And it's also not that bad anyway, because I can build this stuff too to reduce attack, and then Foul Play still does the same amount of damage. One funny thing you can do with this, for example, is you can use Shadow Sneak into Foul Play to, like, you can proc their weakness policy for them, and then go for Foul Play into them and do a lot of damage. It's not always super consistent to do it this way, but like, for example, versus, say, Ysolgaleo, you might Spore them, right? And so that's one option that you can do versus them. And then you can go for Shadow Sneak Foul Play, and that is not a huge momentum suck, honestly, because, like, you might say, oh, well, what if they wake up? Because Shadow Sneak Foul Play won't actually knock out the Solgaleo, right? But if they wake up and they hit my Reshiram for a whole lot of damage, it's not great. So I can either burn them and, like, switch to Reshiram, or I can do, like, Spore, then Sneak, Foul Play. And if they don't wake up, then I just get a kill with Foul Play, and it's really nice. Like, I remember versus a set with Lexicon, I ended up Foul Playing the Calyrex-Ice twice, and 2-hit KOing it that way. And Lexicon's Calyrex-Ice wasn't even weakness policy. So that was, like, an example of what Foul Play can do. So I definitely like Foul Play out of all my options. Another thing that was important about Foul Play as opposed to Hex, because obviously Hex is a weaker hit on Calyrex. If you Foul Play yourself, you do like 50 usually. It's not a ton of damage, but it's definitely, like, annoying. You don't like taking a Foul Play as a proc if you can help it. So usually, like, the times when I would do it would be when my Calyrex was already at, say, -1 from Incineroar. That's a very common thing that happened, and then they'll just reduce the damage that you take significantly. So you can see Foul Play does over half, right? I mean, now, if they're at -1, like, if you're at -1, that's not a huge amount of damage. Hex still does less damage than both of those. So, I mean, it's going to do, like, jack squat to you, right? But it's just a much worse move into the actual opponents. If you, like, for example, compare Foul Play and Hex versus Calyrex Shadow, and if you'd like to take away its attack, you can see that Foul Play does way more damage than Hex does. Hex is still a 2-hit KO, but Foul Play doing more damage is just nicer. I mean, it's obviously nicer to do more damage. And you do more damage on average to opposing targets. So I like Foul Play in the end. Definitely would recommend it on this team in particular. I don't actually know what... I don't know what Gilgamesh ran as the Amoonguss filler move here. I couldn't say. But anyway, yeah. So Focus Sash, definitely the play. I definitely wouldn't have wanted Cobra Berry. I don't know. What does Cobra Berry do for, like, this team? Like, I just want to be able to survive one hit. Like, sometimes. And, like, it doesn't activate all the time, granted. But the times that it does activate, you just, like, own your opponent. Because it's like, oh, yeah, I just lived your attack. I remember there was, for example, one set in Swiss where my opponent went for, like, a Helping Hand Flamethrower with their Palkia into my Amoonguss. And it didn't knock it out, and then I just spored them. And, you know, that's obviously going to be very bad for them. And then they go zzz, and then you win. Amoonguss also, like, capitalized a lot on the Venusaur logic that I had, where a lot of players don't have adequate sleep checks. And so I think it's not so much for Amoonguss as it is for Venusaur, because Venusaur is immediately applying the sleep pressure, whereas Amoonguss, you have a lot more opportunity to react initially. For example, by Dynamaxing your Pokemon, setting Electric Terrain, or setting up a substitute. For example, with Zacian, that's pretty good. Oh yeah, Foul Play is important also for Zacian. Foul Play is not great versus Zacian, but for example, there could be boards or like teams where I'd want to lead Mimikyu Amoonguss into Zacian. You typically want to lead Incineroar into Zacian because you can apply the initial Intimidate. That's pretty strong. And because Fake Out obviously is free into Zacian because it can't Dynamax. But if I feel pressured into leading Mimikyu Amoonguss into a team that has Substitute on their Zacian, Substitute is very free turn 1 versus Amoonguss and Mimikyu. So what I can do on the next turn is I can go for Foul Play. The problem is Foul Play doesn't always break their sub. It's really, really finicky. It's not reliable at all. So if you compare Amoonguss's Foul Play versus Zacian, this will break sub, right? But nobody runs this. Nobody runs something like this. So let's say take a more standard Zacian. This is a typical Zacian investment. It's like 252. So you'd be like, oh, maybe it'll still KO, but like say then they run like this, something like this. then Foul Play is not very reliable to knock that out. 188 divided by 4, let me just think, 188 that's 47. And so you can see that I'm only breaking the sub 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 16th of the time, which again is kind of like the roll that I had earlier. So theoretically, you could do, like, for example, a Foul Play Will-O-Wisp combination attack into a sub, but that's not super great if that Foul Play doesn't break. If the Foul Play doesn't break, it's really bad. So, even though Foul Play helps versus Zacian, it's not enough. And so if I was ever in that state, then I would, like, always sneak and Foul Play into the Zacian sub. Typically, they would not protect on that initial turn. It is very rare for them to ever do that. So that means you break their sub, and they aren't very likely to go for a second sub, at least initially, right, before they know about the Foul Play. And then from there, you can, like, pressure them with either a Will-O-Wisp or a Spore, so it's pretty good from that stage. But that is several turns of Trick Room that you have to dedicate to doing that, but it's not the end of the world, because once you have, like, the pressure of Will-O-Wisp or Spore, then you can switch out the other into your restricted and go from there. But yeah, that's Amoonguss. And then the final Pokemon here is Gastrodon. So Gastrodon was very interesting too. Originally, I had Gastrodon with Leftovers and Yawn, like this typical Gastrodon that you'd see on most balanced teams, like for example Rainier Sun. But then I remember, like, when I was testing this and figured out, like, okay, the purpose of Gastrodon is to, like, you stop the Kyogre from maxing. I remember I talked about this a little bit earlier, where the typical Kyogre-Zacian counterplay is going to be max Kyogre, and then you have Incin Zacian. Well, Gastrodon is really good versus all three of those, because it redirects Max Geyser, and Earth Power is super effective versus both Incineroar and Zacian. And also, with Calyrex-Ice on the board at the same time, you remove Shuka Berries, so that means that Incineroars are a lot weaker. So if I had more time, I probably would have gone back and changed the Gastrodon spread. I had a very specific benchmark with this Gastrodon, where I had Glacial Lance plus Max Quake would knock out both Incineroar and Zacian very reliably. It would depend on their bulk, but it would KO very, very reliably. So you'd, like, for an example, see Gastrodon versus 76 Soft Sand versus Zacian, and you can see, like, if they have, say, 4 HP, you know, that KOs, right? But they typically aren't 4 HP, so you can say, like, say they're max HP. Then this plus a Glacial Lance, like a -1 Glacial Lance, will always pick up the knockout. And it's also really nice that it doesn't pick up the knockout as well, because, like, if you don't pick up the knockout, that means that Glacial Lance gets the boosts from that. And so you can really, like, steamroll with both Pokemon at the same time, because you're giving yourself special defense boosts on both your Pokemon. And that makes it really powerful. And it's also similarly why Gastrodon has Recover and not Yawn on this team. If you want to put Pokemon to sleep, you already got this guy. This guy is a lot better at putting Pokemon to sleep than Gastrodon. Gastrodon is more of, like, with Yawn, is more of a defensive reaction, whereas Gastrodon on this team is more of an offensive Pokemon, paired specifically with Calyrex-Ice. So Recover is nice because you'll often get, like, several Quake boosts, and then, like, at end of Trick Room when they play defensively, because that would stop Yawn, right? But that doesn't stop Recover. So you can recover off any damage that you happen to have taken, and you're going to be good. So Gastrodon, very powerful. I liked it a lot in testing. In the actual tournament itself, it sucked. It sucked because I kept playing against Miracle Seed Rillaboom, and that obviously just knocks you out. Like, my Gastrodon, it has enough bulk, like, because I'm running, like, you know, I had its very specific special attack and then generic defense. But this generic defense is, for example, I wanted to be able to, like, more reliably survive Play Rough out of Trick Room if I had taken some chip. I wanted to be able to survive Grassy Glide in Trick Room from opposing Rillaboom. So if you look at, like, for example, 180, 252, you can see this Play Rough from Zacian. You can see, that's not max. You can see, I mean, that should increase the odds that, like, you'll be living the attack. You don't want to, like, EV specifically for this, right? And, like, Rillaboom, if you look at that, you can see that you live the attack, and you'll live it, like, pretty comfortably, too. Like if they combine it with, like, a Fake Out or something, then that's not going to kill. And then hopefully the theory is that I've got Calyrex-Ice on the board, and then Glacial Lance just kills the Rillaboom, so I only have to take 1 hit from it. But of course, with Miracle Seed, that is enough damage to knock it out a lot more reliably than what I would like to see, right? It's not like guaranteed, especially since not all Miracle Seed Rillaboom run max attack. Some of them will cut back. I think this was Pengy's, not 100% sure, but it's still like reliable enough that you gotta like you can't stop that unless you have your own Intimidate or unless you like burn it or something, which is tricky to be able to do. And also, like, it's not like Gastrodon can one-shot Rillaboom in return unless you have a special attack boost, because Max Hailstorm, even of itself, is going to do some damage, but not quite enough. You need a boost to make it work. Anyway, so I would have probably, if I had a chance to go back, maybe like make this roll with Grassy Glide, like maybe just make that 100%, or like this much, something like that, and then dump the rest in the special attack. Even though that goes against the philosophy of how Gastrodon Calyrex-Ice was supposed to pair up, I think maybe it just would have been better. I'm still haunted by not knocking out the Zacian in my top 8 set. I don't remember how much bulk that Pengy had, but like, let's say it's like this. I don't think Pengy had this much, but you can see, like, at +1, I needed this to knock out Zacian, and it didn't do it. And I mean, this was like game it. Like I was banking on this taking a knockout, and it didn't, and like it just like swung the momentum like just significantly, because I was in a situation where I couldn't afford to max because I was scared of Rillaboom Grassy gliding me later, because I was dumb and didn't bring Incineroar, and that's it. Anyway, but that's enough about that. Yeah, the speed again. I was very lazy with the speed. I just went with Min. You need to underspeed Calyrex-Ice, so you need to be close to Min anyway. So I'm like, yeah, I'll just do this. And again, similar logic to Amoonguss, like, you know, in case they foul play me, or in case they, you know, strengths at me or whatever, then they get a little bit of extra, or they get a little bit less gain out of it. Or if like a Zapdos Hurricane me, then it's better, because I don't really need Quiet. There's not a whole lot that I need to underspeed. There wasn't a particular order that I really cared that much about Amoonguss and Gastrodon themselves attacking in, so yeah. That's that. Does anybody else have any other questions before I continue on to like just an overview of the rounds that I had? Any questions about the team? I'll go ahead and pull up the main paste. If anyone's got any specific things. Like I said, I don't know exactly the details on what Gilgamesh had. This is just all my... This is the 6 were not original, and most of the moves were not original to me. The EVs were, so can't say if that's a good thing or not for them. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Hopefully that just means I explained it really well. Why Reshiram over Palkia? That's a good question. The chief reason is because Reshiram is a lot better versus things that you're weak to than Palkia is. Like, Palkia, if you run it, it's very good versus Kyogre. If you run Palkia versus Kyogre, that's good because you could set Trick Room against it pretty reliably. But it's a lot weaker versus Zacian, and you can tell that this team is like not super good versus Zacian. Like, Incineroar is good versus Zacian. I mean, good conditionally. Amoonguss is good versus Zacian conditionally. If Calyrex-Ice gets going in Trick Room, it's good versus Zacian. But Reshiram is really nice because it doesn't take very much damage from Zacian and does a lot of damage back. Like, you're threatening a knockout. Whereas with Palkia, you have to Dynamax in order to pressure a knockout on Zacian. Reshiram doesn't have to do that. And also, Reshiram is much better into Sun compositions. Because Reshiram just inherently gets buffed by, like, Groudon coming. Like, for example, say Groudon is... Groudon versus Palkia can be very annoying because Palkia will be Dragoning versus... you can Dragon versus the Groudon and bring its attack down, but you can't really go for max water as reliably. And I feel like I was better versus Kyogre overall. Calyrex, if it gets special defense boost, it's really good versus Kyogre. Amoonguss is okay versus it, as long as they don't set electric terrain. Mimikyu is typically able to set up Trick Room versus it, and Gastrodon is really good versus it. So, I felt like the team was a lot better overall. And again, I didn't originate the idea of Reshiram, but it made a lot more sense, in my opinion. If rain is up, Reshiram does have to max. You don't necessarily have to, actually. Blue Flare still does a lot of damage. Like, for example, if you look at Blue Flare versus a lot of different Pokemon, like versus Zacian, you can see that this does, like, this is max HP Zacian. And so in the rain, this does over half. I mean, this 2-hit KOs. Its Blue Flare is still stronger than Earth Power, and that's max HP Zacian, right? And if you look at, for example, versus Rillaboom, you can see that Blue Flare is a knockout. If you look at it versus opposing Calyrex-Ice, you can see that it's a knockout. It's pretty good, I think, in general. It's obviously not as good versus Kyogre stuff, but I wasn't worried as much about Kyogre stuff. And you can also max versus it, too. Like, I mean, if you've got, like, if you look at Kyogre versus that, like, this is going to be your typical Kyogre set with Mystic Water. And I have max HP. I think I was forced spit up, I think. Yeah, anyway. So you can see, I mean, that's not a whole lot of damage. And if I max myself, then I'm going to get either max Flare, which does nothing to the Kyogre, but might do some damage to the opponent. Or I can use max Quake and gain special defense boost, so it's okay. Would you change any Mons on the team after playing at the event, or would you change spreads? I think if you change too many Pokemon on this team, then it becomes a different team. Probably the most important thing you would change, like that I would look at changing, is playing around with P2 modes, like what Serapis had. I think Serapis's team is, I mean, they obviously did better than mine, right? I think that may have partially just been due to, like, people don't know how to play against this specific variant of it. But I think fundamentally what you need is you need Incineroar, you need Calyrex-Ice if you're running the weakness policy set. You need a way to proc it, so your Trick Room setter has to have a way of procking it. And I think you need to have reliable ways of getting up Trick Room, or you need to have some sort of, like, I don't really care much for Calyrex-Ice on, like, some sort of semi-room team. Like, say, some, like, Groudon, Venu stuff. I don't think that's really the team for it. I think it needs to be more on a hard Trick Room. Psych up P2 after weakness policy proc. What would that even be for? I don't know what move you would give up. Like, if you just look at this, like, if you look at this, Porygon 2 needs a way of proccing Calyrex's weakness policy, so it needs some move to do that, like either, like, what, Foul Play or Shadow Ball. And then needs Trick Room and Recover for sure. It has to have those two moves. So you'd have to run Psych Up, and then you get, like, Psych Up with, what, Shadow Ball? I don't know what other moves that it can use. So you'd have to drop Recover. I mean, if you drop Eerie Impulse, right, but then you have Shadow Ball Psych Up, and then all you're doing is, like, you have a +2 Shadow Ball from a Porygon 2. That's not going to be very impressive. Eerie Impulse is likely to have more value. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be very valuable because, like, you get the boot, so what? Like +2 special attack, Shadow Ball P2 is not going to do very much damage to stuff. I mean, like, if you look at, say, Porygon 2, like, say you have Shadow Ball, and you, like, just versus Kyogre, like, you can see, like, this just does nothing. And that takes you a turn, right, set up as well. I'd much rather Eerie Impulse. Or, like, versus Zacian, say. I mean, that's another Pokemon you'd probably want to attack, right? I mean, this is a +2 Shadow Ball versus Zacian. That just does nothing. That's with no HP. And most Zacian run more than that, so I don't think Shadow Ball, like, that would be what you'd have to do, and that'd be just so awkward. I don't think you'd want Psych Up at all. Unless there would be, like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think you could do anything else, so. Yeah, if any immediate changes probably would be Gastrodon's EVs to be a little bit less Fizz Def and a little bit more special attack. Probably making Amoonguss more Fizz Def as well, just from, like, playing with it. I think a little bit more Fizz Def. I can't give a quantifiable number. With Focus Sash with Amoonguss, sometimes also, like, another relevant goal can be hiding that you actually have the Focus Sash. So, like, for example, surviving a Behemoth Blade from Zacian without proccing Focus Sash is kind of important because you don't want to like, you'd prefer not to reveal it if you could help it. You know, make them think that you're Koba or whatever. So you could run a little bit more defense for something like that. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe making Incineroar a little bit more offensive otherwise. That'd probably be it. I'm trying to look back at the chat and see if there's anything else. I think you were talking about not fake memes, other alternative moves on Reshiram. I didn't even know Reshiram got Psychic. I don't know what you'd use that for. Amoonguss, you can hit that just as hard. I guess you could like set terrain, but Solar Beam would be better for that. But yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and move into the matchups I had. So this was a 9-round tournament that cut to a top 16. So I'll just briefly go over my opponents here and any notable memories I have about those games. Because I know, like, when I watch team reports, one of the things I like to read about is, like, how the games went, especially if I'm the person that was played. Like, for example, when Joe uploaded his report on how he did with his team, I wanted to watch it because I could understand, you know, his logic on how his team worked, and also, like, see how he thought of the match from his perspective. Did I miss having any grass coverage? It can be annoying for Gastrodon a little bit. The only Pokemon I could really afford it on would have been Reshiram with Solar Beam. Seed Bomb you definitely can't afford on Calyrex-Ice because you need both Trick Room and Protect. It is very, very common for Calyrex to be setting a second Trick Room. And to position that in late game, you need Protect. You cannot get away with it. So I think the 4 moves are mandatory on Calyrex. If there's a way you can run Fitzy Bomb on it, I'd be impressed. But it is like, it'll destroy Kyogre in Trick Room, right? But typically I'm not gonna want to Dynamax my Gastrodon in Trick Room, so that's the main thing. And then like Gastrodon, if they're like defensive, it doesn't really matter that much. If they're like trying to yawn loop me, they're gonna lose just me Spore looping them. And even if I don't have Amoonguss healthy, then I can just like Glacial Lance switch. I have Taunt on my Mimikyu, and on my Incin. You know, I eventually can stop them from attacking. And then their attacks do not very much damage to my Calyrex. And it's like, okay, versus Reshiram. Protect's too good, but yeah, Protect is really important. It's really, you're not always maxing the Calyrex. In fact, it was very, very common for me not to max Calyrex for a couple reasons. One, because, like, say it's like turn 4 of Trick Room, and they have a Fresh Zacian in the back, then I can't max, even if it would, like, gain me some immediate advantage on the turn, because what's going to happen is, I'm going to max, they're going to Protect, and then Trick Room's over, and then they're going to Behemoth Blade me, and I don't have any way of pivoting around that anymore. But with Protect, I can, like, Protect, switch in my Amoonguss, or switch in my Incineroar, and then I have Fake Out or Rage Powder Trick Room, and then I can max, and then it's pretty good. So it's not as necessary, I think. Seed Bomb's okay, but I think it'd have to be on a different team. And also, it doesn't help versus Gastrodon that much anyway, because most Yawn Gastrodon EV to underspeed Calyrex. And if you're underspeeding Calyrex, then they yawn you, and you have to like regular Seed Bomb them, which would be funny. But then you still have to switch out anyway, and if you max, then it's not good either. So it's only good for like Kyogre. And again, that's not as big of a problem because usually versus Kyogre teams, I'm maxing my Gastrodon, so it's not as important. But yeah, I'll go ahead and just for the sake of time, I'll move on to my round. So round 1 was against a fellow named Thomas Goff. Their online name is Staticasaurus. They said that they were a newer player going into this regional. They've got a pretty standard team. Normally the electric slot on these teams I feel is a Lucky and not Thunderous. But I remember this game starting off really poorly, but really switching around to my favor later on. My opponent led with like their Rillaboom and Zacian into my Mimikyu and Amoonguss. And they just maxed the Rillaboom and knock out Mimikyu turn 1, and I'm like, oh yeah, they can do that. That wasn't good. So that was pretty good. But I ended up bringing it back with just Calyrex-Ice, because Calyrex-Ice versus this team, like in Trick Room, is really good because they weren't bringing Incineroar versus me. I think that was probably just perhaps partially nerves. They're at their first regional, things like that. But they weren't bringing Incineroar versus me. And Incineroar should be always coming versus this. So I did not like they definitely had to bring Incineroar versus me, and they didn't. So I ended up winning that one too. But they were very nice. I also should mention as well, this was kind of just an anecdote for something I was doing during the tournament. Let me see if I can pull it up, because it was pretty funny in my judgment. I'll probably have to do it this way. Yeah, there we go. Let me pull this up. Okay. New tab. I was messing around and telling people I was running Chansey. Oh, that's not the right one. So I was messing around and telling people I was using Chansey on the day of the event. So a lot of people thought I was using Chansey in the earlier rounds. And once they saw my team, I tried to get them to be a good sport about it and like keep up the rumor that I was using Chansey. And it managed to persist for quite some time. I don't think it was until my top 8 stream that I had fully like shown people like I actually wasn't using Chansey. I think I had people fooled up until like top 16, which is very impressive. But anyway, so my opponent thought I was running Chansey. I was not, in fact. But that's nothing compared to I convinced you, Caleb. That's pretty funny. But yeah, in my round 2, my opponent, I remember I was over in the stream area. My opponent, Justin, I hear them like exclaim like, "No, I've got to fight Chansey!" And they were so distraught. I was like, "Ha! Get missed, kiddo." So maybe that's true, Aldrich. Maybe not. I don't know. But anyway, so they have a Sableye. I'm like, what? How are you worried about Chansey, right? You probably got like Prankster Taunt. And then I'm like, oh shoot, that's really still bad versus me, because if they're like, say, Goggles Taunt on Sableye, I can't do anything versus that. I mean, that's just like asinine to try to stop. Like Goggles Taunt would be just so bad, because they can taunt my Amoonguss, they can taunt both my Trick Room setters, and I can't fake them out. So I have to like spend a turn taunting them before I set Trick Room, and that's just incredibly awkward to try to do, especially when they've got a Zacian and Palkia. Like, Palkia is a good max into me, because Max Dragon will do a ton of damage to Calyrex-Ice, it'll do a ton of damage to Reshiram, and it'll lower my attack. So overall, I thought it was going to be really tough to break. But I learned some important things about the Sableye very early on. Notably, like in turn 1, game 1, I led something that like you would always click taunt versus, and they didn't click taunt versus it. So I'm like, okay, they don't have taunt, and I was correct. Over the course of the set, I eventually figured out that it was Foul Play, Quash, Helping Hand, and Will-O-Wisp, and it was holding a Focus Sash. So that was all very important information to find out. So if the Sableye had like Safety Goggles, Will-O-Wisp, that would be really annoying, because it can Will-O-Wisp my Calyrex and it has priority. Foul Play even was just annoying enough as it is, because obviously that does a lot of damage. And Quash is annoying too, because it obviously limits my impact on Trick Room. It means that like I have to have 2 Pokemon on the field that are threatening at the same time, or I have to make like so the Quash isn't as impactful. So I think I remember in this game, I was in like games I won, I tried to pivot or position my Calyrex and Amoonguss very well together. And I remember it came down very close to the end in game 3. I have my Calyrex at like -1 by like 100%, and my Amoonguss out versus a Sableye that's taken, I think, 1 turn of sleep, maybe 2 turns. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to side Foul Play with my Amoonguss in order to proc my weakness policy on Calyrex, and then go for Glacial Lance and kill the Sableye, right? My Amoonguss is also at 1 HP. Keep that in mind. My Amoonguss is at 1 HP thanks to my Focus Sash. So I go for the side Foul Play onto my Calyrex, proc my weakness policy. Then he goes for Sableye's Foul Play. And so Foul Play happens next, right? I don't get to attack with my Calyrex. So I'm like, oh no! I'm like, this is horrible. he's going knock out my Calyrex, and then he knocked out my Amoonguss. And I'm like, oh, I win. And I just click Glacialize a bunch, and I won. I'm like, thank goodness. He's like, yeah, I didn't even consider that was a play that you could side proc with foul play. He had seen foul play, but didn't think of it in the moment. But Justin was very energetic and a great sport. Very, very fun. I like Justin's energy a lot, so he was very fun to play versus. I also think he upheld the Chansey bluff as too, which was funny too. Because sometimes, you know, when you lose, you're salty. You're not gonna be willing to give your opponent any concessions, right? But I think I overheard him talking like he's like, yeah, I lost to Chansey, man, and people were like saying like, oh man, you gotta like, don't, you know, just take your time, you know, don't mash your moves, you know, you just gotta timer stall it. So that was funny, me like trying to mansplain how to play versus Chansey or whatever. Anyway, so my next round, I had to play against Alex Underhill. Alex did very well at this event. Alex ended up, if I can do things correctly, Alex ended up getting top 4 at this event. And besides Jeremy, the only other loss he had was to me, which is kind of interesting that we were both using Calyrex Reshiram and beat him. I don't think there was anything particularly like the matchup felt pretty even. Basically how it went was Alex led Gothitelle Incineroar, and I led like a Mimikyu Amoonguss, and we were both just like doing nothing the whole time. Like I was clicking Hypnosis, or excuse me, Alex was clicking Hypnosis a bunch, but had never had any offensive pressure on the board, and I was just clicking Spore. And never had any offensive pressure on the board, but I could switch out with Mimikyu, which is nice since Ghost types are able to switch out of Shadow Tag. And like eventually, I just got up Trick Room, and I was able to win. I don't remember if I got very lucky in this game. Oh yes, I did. So Alex he used Hypnosis 4 times in game 1, and the first 2 connected and got very lengthy sleeps. And later he tried to go for 2 more Hypnoses on my Dynamax Reshiram, but both of them missed. So he missed some pretty crucial Hypnosis in game 1. In game 2, he led with Gothitelle and Calyrex-Ice, as I led with Mimikyu Amoonguss. And that was the one where I remember I ended up going for double foul play into the Calyrex, and I knocked it out. This was a really big game of positioning. Alex kept trying to undo Trick Room with Gothitelle. There was a board I remember very, like in about mid-game, where we were both like reversing each other's Trick Rooms, trying to keep stuff up. And I had like Goth, or I had like -1 or -2 Calyrex-Ice versus a Goth that was not in Glacial Ranch range, but I crit the Glacial Ranch, knocked out the Gothitelle, and from there I was able to steamroll. So I got pretty lucky overall versus Alex. If I recall correctly, I think he was 3 for 6 on Hypnosis. So it, you know, about even for what you'd expect. But I definitely felt like I got the better end of the, like, I got more lucky overall. And it can really go either way. Remember running a P+ team and missing 4 Hypnosis in a row and still winning? Yeah. That's what Alex's team is supposed to be able to do. But also my Pokemon like matched up in Trick Room a lot better than Alex's did. And also Alex didn't have Taunt anywhere. It wasn't Taunt on Gothitelle or Taunt on Incineroar. That really surprised me. Like, you know, playing with Mimikyu Amoonguss myself, like, I don't honestly know what he does versus Safety Goggles. Well, I guess he could Hypnosis the Safety Goggles Incineroar. But I still feel like Taunt is so good into that matchup. Alex was similarly eject button on his Incineroar. It was a good game outside of like just like it really just was basically like how many Hypnoses did he hit, and so that's not very great. But and then I got a crit on top of that, so I definitely got fortunate. Wasn't complaining because I knew Alex was going to be good resistance, and I never going to complain about good resistance. Next round, I played against Pengy. This was right before lunch break, and it's ironic because we had played earlier at the regional I attended earlier in the year, Salt Lake City. Where Stefan we also played the round prior to lunch break. The match in Salt Lake was fairly neutral, I thought. I remember I got like hacks to crap out of game 1. I made some good reads in game 2 and got crit to win. And then game 3, he just like bodied me. But here it was not close at all. Holy moly. And that was kind of the same way as in Top Cut 2. I think I kind of let myself I think it let him get to me mentally. But he was always one step ahead. Like, game 1, I lead Mimikyu Amoonguss, and he leads Zapdos Rillaboom. And, like, that's just terrible for me. Like, that is not good, because I had Calyrex-Ice Gastrodon in the back. I'm like, well, shoot, I don't have anything for Rillaboom, so I just lose. And that's basically how it went. I just lost. I ended up confirming that it was the Miracle Seed on Rillaboom, but that was about all of the information I got. I think I did get Trick Room up somehow, but it wasn't good. And so game 2, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to adjust to an Incineroar lead, and then I can play around him a lot better that way. But that was stupid for a number of reasons. One, because Gmax Rillaboom still one-shots my Mimikyu through Miracle Seed, which I did not know at the time. I was an idiot. Pengy told me that after the set, and I'm like, oh. And I calculated, and I'm like, oh, that's not good. But it also just, like, did not turn out well. I remember Pengy led Kyogre and Rillaboom. I saw my Intimidate went first with Incineroar. I'm like, great, I'm just going to fake out the Rillaboom. I don't think he's going to max the Rillaboom again. I don't know why, I just had a feeling. But he switched out into Incineroar and just water spouted, and it was just super over. I couldn't do anything. Because I gave up all my health on my Incineroar turn 1. That scared me out of bringing Incineroar as well as a lead to our top cut set. So many things that Pengy did. Like, I thought his game plan was going to be so Rillaboom centric in top cut, and it didn't work out that way. I mean, it still kind of was. But he just saved Rillaboom smartly, I think, as a pin for Gastrodon and Trick Room, recognizing that how he was playing his AV Kyogre was pretty strong, because I didn't have a lot of immediate damage versus it. So that was 2-0, and it was not close. I thought Pengy kind of defeated me pretty soundly, which I'm like, oh, dang, that's not good. I thought I had the matchup. I'm like, yeah, he just played a lot better than me. That's okay. Then I play the round after lunch break ends, Joe, and I'm like, okay, this isn't actually that bad, because in testing, Groudon and Veltal stuff is super free for Calyrex-Ice Reshiram. Because, I mean, just look at it. Like, Calyrex-Ice hits Groudon, Yveltal, Venusaur for super effective damage. It hits Regieleki for a lot of damage. Normally, those teams have, like, Foul Play P2. This has a Yawn Gastrodon. Or excuse me, they have Ice Beam P2 on these teams, which is really free, because then they can't touch Calyrex at all. But even if they have Foul Play, you know, it's not the end of the world. Gastrodon is a little bit worse because it can underspeed and go for Yawn. And the only thing you have to really worry about is Incineroar. And then Reshiram is really good too, because Reshiram can max with Sun Up, do a ton of damage to everything as well. Very, very strong. And so I'm like, this is free. I just leave Mimikyu, Incineroar, with Calyrex and Reshiram in the back, and it's free. You know, yeah, I wasn't like that at all. I think in game 1 I did Amoonguss, because I expected him to lead with Venusaur, and he did. So I ended up, I got a Spore and a Veltal, but I made a very greedy switch. I switched my Amoonguss out to Calyrex without taunting the Venusaur, and got caught by a Sleep Powder, a really important Sleep Powder, and it kind of slept long enough that I wasn't able to make a comeback from that point. So Joe made a really solid read in game 1. And then in game 2, holy moly. Joe, like, just obliterated me. I was like, bro, this isn't fair. So I adjust and I lead Mimikyu Incin into what Joe was leading, which was Venu Yveltal. Turn 1, I fake out the Venu because I don't think he's going to max it. He doesn't. And so now I have Amoonguss and Incin out versus Yveltal and Venu. I'm pressuring a Flare Blitz knockout on the Venusaur. So I'm like, okay, what he's probably going to do is he's probably going to switch in Incineroar on that slot and do something with the Yveltal, because Yveltal's not under a lot of pressure here. It can still hit something for a lot of damage. Like, okay, he probably wants to foul play my Incin to cover me, like, parting into the Calyrex-Ice. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to Will-O-Wisp the Yveltal and parting shot it, so I just, like, cripple it. That'll let my Calyrex come in a lot safer. It could take the hit and get the weakness policy. So I double into the Yveltal. The Yveltal protects, and the Venusaur in Trick Room, like, with its Sash broken, doesn't switch out to Incineroar, just puts my own Incineroar to sleep. And Joe pops off, and I'm like, dude, you're a genius. I I think I understood his reasoning a little bit. Like, after I reflected on it, I'm like, okay, the reason he didn't switch to Incin because he wanted to fresh Incin when my Calyrex hit the board. And so he's like, I'm just going to sack this because I don't care. Like, if my Venu goes down, that's one less turn that you've got to win with your Calyrex. I think that was the logic. But he was just, like, so far ahead. I remember there was a situation in the end game where he ended up kind of throwing. He went for Sleep Powder and Precipice Blades with his Groudon when he could have gone for Earth Power and Precipice Blades. If he had missed either attack, then it could have been very advantageous for me. Or especially if he missed Sleep Powder, I would have won the game. But he never missed any Sleep Powders because that's the X9 difference, baby. So Joe just like thoroughly destroyed me in what should be like a really, really, really positive matchup for me. Like I'm supposed to win that massive matchup. Like it is not like unlosable, but it's very favorable for me. And so Joe like made every call right every time. And so I was like, dang, you know, I'm like, all right, he just good playered me. I'm like, just gonna have to come back. So my next round was against Luke Peters. I wasn't familiar with Luke, which I was very happy because I just played 3 good opponents in a row. Like three really solid ones I like knew of in advance. And so no disrespect to Luke, but it was just nice to see a name I didn't recognize on the pairings. You know, I was 3-2 at this point. You know, there's plenty of people at 3-2 that I didn't want to play. But Luke, I believe it was his first regional tournament, and he was, oh my goodness, he was so full of energy. He was so excited, so friendly. Luke was really, really cool. I liked Luke a lot. He was a swell guy. He wore his plays on his sleeve though. Like I could tell a lot of information about what he was gonna do, just based on like we were like casually chatting during the game. And I remember like I think I spored his Pokemon at one point, and he like he looked a little bit upset. And I'm like, oh, that's probably safety goggles on Incineroar, right? And I was correct. This game was interesting. I recall that the Solgaleo never, in both games, it maxed, but it never got to attack. It either used Max Guard or was just sleeping the whole time. So my Amoonguss like clicked Spore a whole bunch, and it wasn't very good. I think Luke had opportunities to outplay me in different board states. Like he positioned his Incin Amoonguss really well versus me, like how I was trying to play versus it. I was like, I was treating Luke pretty disrespectfully. I was just like taunting everything with my Mimikyu, and he wasn't falling for it. He played pretty well, I think. But I ended up sporing him a bunch, and that was enough. And he didn't get anything out of his Dynamax either, so ended up being pretty positive for me overall. So that was Luke's game. Luke, after the match, I remember he was very friendly after the game too. He would like if we saw each other, he would say hi. He had his folks were there, and they had like a really big Lucario plush. It was so huge. It was really cool. I liked it a lot. So, but I thought Luke was a really swell guy, and I hope he enjoyed the event because I enjoyed getting to play against him. My next opponent was in round 7 versus Enmanuel Zapata. Enmanuel does have a Twitter. You'll notice that all my other opponents I have like their usernames. Enmanuel did not give me one. I did find them on Twitter later. I believe they replied to one of my tweets. But since they didn't explicitly tell me their social media or their online handle in person, just out of respect to them, I'm not going to include it here. So they have Yveltal Grimmsnarl, and this is Assault Vest Yveltal. So this is again like Calyrex just goes in here. It hits Lando, Yveltal for huge damage. The Yveltal can't protect, which is important. It's got Zacian, which I can hit with both my Calyrex and my Reshiram, and Regieleki doesn't do a whole lot. In game 1, I remember I got up Trick Room. My opponent, I think they had Yveltal Grim out. They maxed their Yveltal, and they try to Thunder Wave my Calyrex to stop it from going for a Glacial Lance, but it didn't work. I got a double KO, and it was just super over from there. In game 2, they committed a lot more to just Thunder Waving my Pokemon. So the Grimmsnarl just kept spamming Thunder Wave over and over and over again. And it was it's okay. You know, that's what happens. And so I'm like, all right, game 3, I'm gonna stop you doing that. So they keep leading Yveltal Grimmsnarl, which does not threaten a knockout on Amoonguss at all. And they didn't know I was Focus Sash either. So if they like max the Yveltal, then I mean, that's inconsistent for a number of reasons because they don't know my item at all. So I might be Koba and live, I might be Sash and live, they don't know that. So I lead with Mimikyu Amoonguss into Yveltal and Grimmsnarl. In turn 1, they max the Grimmsnarl to set Misty Terrain. So I can't Spore them. So that wasn't good. But it ended up being a net positive for me. Like the initial turns were awkward, but they used their max just to set Misty Terrain, which was annoying for my Amoonguss, but it meant they couldn't Thunder Wave me. So that made things a lot better later. I do recall getting a critical hit. I believe it was through Reflect. That I don't remember. I think it was like I was trying to make a read on them, and it didn't pan out, but I got the critical hit, so it worked out anyway. And I think it may have swung the match in my favor more than it should have. I don't recall. I remember I thought in game 3 I was winning by a lot, and then I like got a critical hit, and then I just became like there was no chance of me losing at a certain point. So Enmanuel played very well. We were both laughing about just, you know, Thunder Waving, like him just Thunder Waving me to try to get out of a bad matchup. But it was pretty funny. Enmanuel was very kind too. Very respectful player. In my round 8, I played against Kyle Ayala, whose name is Kairoshiii online. And this was very awkward. You'll see here this says a T. That is not a typo. That is, we actually tied. I bet you've never seen that before in a VGC match. Yeah, we actually tied. So in game 1, it was like probably turn 4 or last turn of Trick Room. I just get a KO. Like they sack off their Calyrex or something. And then their switch crashes. I'm up 4-3 and their switch is like completely crashes. Like it says the software closed. It wasn't like a disconnect. Like the switch just crashed. I have no idea what could have caused it. I legitimately don't know. But yeah, anyway, their switch crashed. And so like judges came over and were like, what do we do? I'm like, I didn't know if I got the win or if I didn't know it was gonna happen. Like I'm like I assumed because it was their switch that crashed, I would get the win. And that was what I was hoping for. But I'm like 4-3. I'm like they might just have us like null and void the game, and then we just do another game 1. I'm like, you know, that wouldn't be so bad either. My position was probably neutral for us. It wasn't like clear advantage for either player. He probably had like the edge, but it's hard to say. Like it was very even at that point. And so I wasn't gonna mind, you know, playing again. I don't remember if I got a whole bunch of information that was relevant. But it was still like I'm okay with replaying if we have to. And then they ruled it as a tie. So I didn't quite understand what that. I'm like, okay, we tie. That means I'm like, can we go to sudden death then? Yeah, and they're like, yeah. So either one of you wins 2-0, and then you just win the round, right? Or if you go 1-1, you have to go to sudden death. And I'm like, dude, I want to play sudden death. What do you do? And so I'm like, if I go to sudden death, I'm just gonna lead Reshiram Amoonguss and just like max Reshiram and just hope I can take KOs. But like, luckily I was able to just win. I guess 2-0 with a tie. I don't know how to say that right. I recall in game 3, because it was game 3, that my I didn't have a clear path to victory. I had like a Mimikyu that was healthy, an Incineroar that was not very healthy, and a Amoonguss, and I had burned the Zacian and like intimidated at least once. So I was like, I'm not gonna try to pivot Incin Amoonguss. I'm not gonna like try. I could like Rage Powder, try to get Incin on the board, and then like Rage Powder Flare Blitz and hope I kill him. But I'm like, I don't need to do that. So I just start timer stalling them, and it was pretty effective. After a certain point, Kyle realized what I was doing and just forfeited the game because there wouldn't have been any way to bring it back. Because I was just like I would like pivot to Incin with Amoonguss Rage Powder. Then I fake out the Incin, or then I fake out the Zacian, switch Amoonguss out to Mimikyu, then switch my Incin to Amoonguss, so they have to call that and go for Behemoth Blades, and then I just repeat that process for a while. And eventually I would end up with a board state where I'd have Amoonguss Incin out if I really need to attack, but I didn't ever have to, so would have won that game on time. So it ended up taking a long time, which meant I was the last match to be completed because the judges took like 20 minutes to decide what to do, which is no fault of them because heck if I know what you're supposed to do there. But it was pretty fun. The head judge was pretty cool about everything, explaining everything to us very clearly. There wasn't any ambiguity in things, so that was nice. In round 9, my opponent was Abdul Bari. Bigslim is what they go by online. And they have a matchup that like this looked really good for me. Reshiram, I mean, just look at Reshiram versus this team. Like Reshiram does heavy damage to Gastrodon, one-shots the Calyrex. If they like let me get Sun up as well, then like Max Flare in Sun versus Calyrex like just does so much damage. Even if they Dynamax, it just like does so much. They've got a Venusaur, but it's not the end of the world because I've got 2 Spore Immunes. They've got their own Mimikyu and then Incin and stuff. I'm like, okay. I think it should be all right. In game 1, in both games they lead with Venusaur and a Mimikyu. In game 1, I led with Mimikyu and Reshiram. I remember I just pivoted around. I got like Reshiram in a good board state. They weren't able to do a whole lot because I just have the restricted matchup in my opinion. In game 2, it was actually really funny. So they reveal Protect on their Venusaur in game 1. Which is important. So they've got Protect, Sleep Powder, and then probably +2, so they don't have Weather Ball. So in game 2, my opponent leads with Mimikyu and Venusaur again, and I lead with Incin and Reshiram because that lets me pressure immediately the Sleep Powder on Venusaur. Oh yeah, I remember in game 1, he needed to hit every Sleep Powder and didn't hit every Sleep Powder, and ended up losing a whole bunch of momentum for it. But in game 2, I lead with Incin Reshiram to try to bluff that I'm just going to double into the Venusaur because I know he's got Protect. And I'm like, this is fine because he's just not doing any damage to me ever. Like if he puts me to sleep, that's okay because he's not pressuring me with a whole lot, so I can just wake up later. So instead of doubling the Venusaur, I double the Mimikyu with Blue Flare and Flare Blitz. I'm like, that's probably not going to KO, but it's going to do a decent chunk to it. And the Mimikyu can't do jack squat to me. So I'm like, maybe the Mimikyu switches. And if I like catch a Groudon with Blue Flare and Flare Blitz, that would be huge. But the Mimikyu actually sets Trick Room for me, and I'm like, okay. So I miss the Blue Flare, but I end up Flare Blitzing and burn the Mimikyu, which I'm like, okay, that's great. You know, burning Mimikyu is going to be nice. I'll put some chip damage on it for later, set it for Glacial Lance KOs, etc. So now my opponent has Mimikyu and Venu in Trick Room, and I'm like, they're just going to expect their Venu to either die or get a Sleep Powder off. So I go for Taunt and Blue Flare into the Venusaur. Because I expect them to just want to take the double target, get knocked out, and then they have Calyrex-Ice, Mimikyu and my Incins on the field, so that's going to be awkward for them. So I go for Taunt and Blue Flare into the Venusaur. Taunt stops their Sleep Powder, but Blue Flare burns them. So that's not good. So I had missed the Mimikyu, but I had hit the Venusaur and burned it when I didn't want to, which let it get a free switch. But I ended up, by pivoting around later, I remember I did not bring, I didn't bring my own Mimikyu to this game. I brought Calyrex-Ice and Amoonguss. And so I was able to pivot Amoonguss into situations where it was very uncomfortable for my opponent because I could just spore them. And I had like Incineroar, Reshiram. I remember they got, I think, +2 or +3 on the Calyrex-Ice, but they were at like 60% health. I sent out my Reshiram out of Trick Room and just blow them up with Max Flare. So Reshiram coming in clutch there. So that was 7-2, and meant that we got to move on to top 16. They decided that they wanted to play top 16 that day. Not entirely sure why. That was just their decision. The reason they gave was because of venue constraints and because of stream stuff. So they said that the logic couldn't have been that it was open for too long because, like, yeah, I don't know, because there's definitely plenty of time. So I didn't quite understand that, like, the next day, but anyway, it's like, oh, it conflicts with the stream schedule, and we're like, well, we're willing to come in early, and they're like, no, we're still gonna do this. But the head judge was pretty, like, he was at least very transparent with what was going on, so that was good. Anyway, so I play against Nora Bowman, who goes by Bubs online. Nora was not the name on the match slip, but that'll be the name I'll refer to my opponent as here because that's what they go by online. So I'll use Nora for their name. Anyway, so Nora has a Calyrex Shadow Zacian team. Pretty standard. I mean, like with Blastoise and stuff. Oh, excuse me, that's not a Venusaur. That should be a Rillaboom. There was no Venusaur on this. Anyway, so this was this was the top 16 game. So both games, Nora led with Regieleki and Calyrex into me with Zacian and Incineroar in the back. In game 1, I go for Shadow Sneak and Foul Play into Calyrex, just knock it out straight away. And also my Mimikyu lived, which was nice. And so I'm like, that's probably gonna pressure stuff later. I'm pretty happy with that. Also, then from there, I recall my Reshiram was able to do really well in Trick Room. Nora revealed that the Incineroar had close combat and actually ended up going for Max Knuckle to offset like Dragon Drops and Intimidates. So that was kind of funny, but ended up winning that one. In game 2, they made an interesting play. Regieleki Dynamaxed and went for Max Darkness. Into, like, I led Mimikyu Amoonguss again, but they went for Max Darkness into my Amoonguss as I went for Spore. So what they should have done was Max Darkness my Mimikyu, because then Calyrex Shadow can pick up a knockout. But because it was targeted into Amoonguss, it didn't knock out Amoonguss with the follow-up Astral Barrage. I got to Spore the Regieleki, set Trick Room, and then from there it was very, very, very tough for Nora to make a comeback. I remember Reshiram just kind of cleaned up. There was a board state in the mid-game where Nora may have been able to come back. Calyrex was damaged. It had its Focus Sash broken. But my Reshiram was at -1 special attack from Incineroar's Parting Shot. But Shadow Ball picked up a knockout on the Calyrex Shadow, and I don't think Nora was very pleased about that. But I did not mind one bit. So yeah, that was top 16. And then top 8 versus Stefan, you can watch on your own on the stream. I had made an error in my notes, and Stefan had actually pointed out this to me after top 8, where I thought that the Incineroar was insanely fast. I thought it was faster than my Reshiram. So it was like at least 97 or 98 speed. So in game 1, I expect the Incineroar to go for a Parting Shot, and I try to Will-Wisp to catch either the incoming Zacian or the incoming Rillaboom. Because in my practice the previous night, like my game plan was basically burn the Rillaboom, and then Gastrodon wins. That was typically how it went. But the Incineroar was slower than my Mimikyu, and then I'm like, I'm an idiot. And so then in game 2, I tunnel visioned, expecting the same play from Stefan, and so I switch into Calyrex and go for Max Quake, which is very, very greedy, because even if it works out, I still have to I have to still, it's still awkward to set Trick Room from that board state, but my thought process is, okay, if I do that, then at least Reshiram, Reshiram will get Trick Room, and my Max Flares can pressure the other slot, and then Gastrodon will beat Kyogre in a 1v1. But then Pengy is smart and just switches out turn 1, so I am denied the knockout, and then from there it's just super over. I remember I was just going all in on my turn 1, and it's not even that consistent if it works out. What I should have done was adjust, but I just kind of I'm like, this is my game plan, I'm just going to go with it. I'm not adjusting, and I should have adjusted to Incineroar leading with other stuff. Pengy told me after the game that he was a little bit more worried about Calyrex-Ice Incin. I probably wouldn't have tried that if it would have been possible to do something with that, but it led to all sorts of 50-50s. I didn't want to do that. Instead, I just tried to make 50-50s with my current strategy, which didn't work out very well either. And I ended up not trick rooming with Mimikyu in situations where like I could have, but it wouldn't have made a difference because Grassy Glide's priority in Trick Room or out of Trick Room. So trying to catch that Will-O-Wisp was a valiant attempt by Mimikyu, but it did not end up working out. So that was my whole run. Like I said, the paste is now yours if you're interested in it. If you're watching this on YouTube, which eventually I'll put it up there. There's the team. I'll put it in the chat. There you go. If you want the team, how about it? Have some fun. I like this team a lot. It was very fun to play with. Definitely a good meta call for the event. Because obviously it did very well just beyond me. And obviously, you know, Serapis got second, and then Lexicon, with a similar hard Trick Room team, although not quite the same with Reshiram, got top 4. And then Adrian, I wasn't familiar with Adrian, but Adrian got top 16. So all in all, pretty cool. I think that's all I've got for today. Appreciate anyone who came out live. Hopefully I was able to answer enough questions. I'm sure that if I look back through this, I'll see like, oh, I missed this person. I'm sorry if I missed this person or that person. But hopefully you can take advantage of the team. I don't think it's something that's going to be meta-defining, but I think it is very fun and very rewarding to use. So, again, thank you for coming out. Until next time, have a good one.